This is the Living Fearless Today podcast, a show that helps men like you and me who are struggling to get unstuck and overcome fear to live confidently and courageously. I'm your host and transformation coach, Mike Forster, helping you create the change you want now. Join me as I interview men who've conquered their challenges and soared to success as they spill their secrets on how they live fearless today. Well, hello and welcome back, my friend. Man, today I am with a friend, Joe Fier, and Joe and I have had a chance with PodFest and just talking about podcasts outside of this. And honestly, as I was beginning my podcasting journey, Joe was one of the presenters at like an online version of PodFest, and man, just dropped some amazing content. But beyond just that content, Joe is such an encouraging guy. He's the host of the Hustle and Flowchart podcast. And what you're going to catch in those episodes is not just the business side of things, right? That's part of life, but it's also how do we live life? How do I find balance and still be effective and live for joy, not just, my bottom line. So, man, Joe, I'm so excited to have you here today. How are you doing today, my friend?
Hey, Mike, it's so good to be here. And yeah, we've been chatting about this concept in this episode for a while now. So I'm happy we're making it happen, man.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's been one that as we've talked with each other about business and the personal side, it's like, man, there is just so much that, we can get in our heads and think I'm the only one going through it. Yeah. And as you and I have talked about it, it's like, no, we're normal.
Yeah, give yourself a break a little bit, right? You're unique, Absolutely. But your situation I think a lot of others have been through things like that. And also a shared experience that we have is through nothing's random, but you used to be essentially a neighbor. Well, you were a high school rival of mine, different eras, but same schools. And, you're out in Kansas now. I'm in San Diego, but I'm like, man, how cool is that? So that's a shared thing that we also have.
Yeah. The funny thing was we were still, talking about that. I'm like, yeah, my wife actually went to your high school. It's like,
that's right.
All right, man. We might as well have been neighbors and played baseball together.
Probably. Yeah. So yeah, man, I love what you're doing here for folks listening. So yeah, this is going to be fun, man.
I appreciate it, brother. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You've been super supportive and I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Got it.
Well, let's jump in. What does life look like for you today on the professional side of life?
Professional side, it's definitely expanding is what it feels like. I'm hitting my flow and, I've been doing this for over 15 years, being an entrepreneur, a self-starter. I've had multiple businesses, different partnerships along the way. Yet now I feel like I've realized what my unique superpower is, my unique abilities are in business. Translates to all factors, but really for the business side, I'm seeing where the scale of my superpowers can lie, and really that's being a connector. Like that's what it comes down to for me is connecting people, connecting ideas, businesses, strategies. Like, yeah, it's connecting the dots. And people have told me this for years, and now I'm realizing, oh yeah, that's actually it. It's not being in the weeds of everything. It's not high level, but it's kind of like this middle glue area is where I find myself. So I'd say that's what's feeling good on the business front.
And that's awesome because it's like, if you look back, there's been all these years of like startup and hustle and really grinding to get to this point. And I think it's just a testimony to like, once you are persistent and that momentum builds up, things change. It doesn't always stay in that startup state. So, and we'll get into some of that here in a little bit as well.
Yeah.
So what does life look like on the personal side?
Great question. I love that you bring both sides into this because I think of it all the time. It all blends, yet at the same time on the personal side, what comes up is, so I have a 4-month-old and I have a 4-year-old. So life is full in all regards. But when it comes to family, I feel tighter with my family than ever. A lot more bonded. Second child in, different phase. We'll talk about some of the ups and downs that actually have happened on both kids. One of them you don't really know about, but very mirrored situations. I'll just say that. So that's a little dog ear. But the fact that it's brought me closer, and it goes back to business. I've settled myself into what's my superpower, where I can kind of release mental, the need to do a lot of other things in my mind, so I could be more present at home. Because definitely family is everything for me on the personal side. I'm feeling way more fulfilled with what I do with them. But so there's a lot of time blocking and prioritization that I didn't have before that now I dedicate to them and myself. It's not just external to them, but my own being on the personal side. We'll get into some of those practices, I'm sure.
Well, let's since we're talking about time blocking, let's jump into talking about, some of the stuff that you've learned along the way, because at one point, part of your belief system was, hey, I have to grind. I have to put in all this work in order to see the success, feel the success, and be the business owner that I want to be, right? It was a lot of investment of time, which means then you're going to sacrifice in other areas, but you're now in a opposite position. So what did it look like at that point when I say, hey, Joe, you were at this, really grinding kind of mindset, to then how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah. So this transition from the hustle grind of the day to day, I probably made myself gray a little bit for doing that. And I can't blame her, but I love her for it, is my mom. I think instilled some really heavy work ethic in me. And there was a period of time I worked for a construction company that she was a part of. She moved her way up to be the VP of this pretty large construction company here in San Diego, which there's no women in her role, and her being the only woman that has basically done that in all of Southern California. So it's a lot of pressure that she put on herself. And there's a whole history, and I'm a big believer that, I'm a result of conditioning, and it's almost like the ceiling of what she knew for herself and saw as reality, and I saw a cool quote is our parents and what they give us is ideally it's their ceiling and it's our foundation or ground level that we can continue to build from. And I believe that's true. And now experiencing some wild stuff throughout life, I think that is very true. So she gave me some great work ethic, and at the same time, it was me hustling and grinding, feeling like I would have to buzz around. People pleasing was part of it as well. I know that quality was and still is in me, which is great. But at the same time, I think that also can go way the wrong direction. And then, that's where you feel like you got to say yes to everything, or at least I was kind of that guy. And that led to a lot of grinding, a lot of hustle, and not taking a step back and prioritizing. And again, going back to what are my strengths and what do I want out of this? So I'm not perfect, but at the same time now I do slow myself down when there's a decision or a new, it's a fork in the road in a sense, where I know depending on the direction that I choose here, it's going to open up different possibilities, and I'm possibly closing down others when I make that decision. And also it's what am I giving up by saying yes to this new thing? Maybe it's time with the family or time with myself or expanding on a project more than starting a new one. It's all these different things now pop into my mind, and I'm a quick start by nature. So I want to, I mentioned right before we started the Kolbe assessment, KOLBE, $55. I think it's one of the best investments that you can make in yourself. And you get an understanding of who you are and how you like to operate, quick start or not. I'm on a 9 quick start out of 10. So actually, I think it's out of 9. So I'm up there. And So I'm a visionary type, and I know that, but I'm not one to get in the weeds. Like that's where things will crumble, so it's like, that's why I'm supported by team now. I have team, and I can really balance out my calendar by time blocking, like you mentioned, and it keeps me in order. I'm not taking calls after 3:00 typically. At least they can't get on my schedule without me saying yes to it. It's got to be the right reason. So buffers like that have no calls on Fridays, except for you. Literally, you were the only one, and it is a rare thing. Yeah, and like I promise you, it's the case. So that's what keeps me, not hustling and grinding too hard.
Well, I appreciate you making the exception. I mean, we've been working the schedule and finally landed on a time. So thank you for the flexibility there.
Of course.
So when you're kind of on this quick start, dude, I have personally gone through this. I've met lots of other men where it's like, hey, I can start. But you can either get into the point of, hey, I don't want to let this die, right? So it's almost an identity issue, but you don't complete it. And then from the sounds of it, you also have been able to transition, right? You're not married to the idea. It's like, hey, this isn't working. Let me go ahead and try something else. Do you see that, hey, yeah, I'm still able to be flexible and finish things without being, committed, right, to that idea. In order to be successful, I have to finish this and I can't let it die. And do you see that you've got that kind of flexibility?
Yeah, and I do. I feel like that's, over the last handful of years, I've molded that a lot more so than I feel like I was pretty flexible in the beginning because I didn't know a lot, in like the beginning of my career, especially online and different scenarios. I had business partners and stuff, so it's like there's different approaches to solving the problem, and I think there is a point to where I started learning a lot more. So then, it's almost it's like, okay, why can't this just get done? But then when, you're working with teams and stuff, you got to be flexible, or business partners. And, I've very experienced in all those respects. I've always had teams of some sort, even from the very beginning. I knew I couldn't do it all. There was like a phase of me doing it myself for like maybe a good year. To start up, but then I was like, nope, need help. Like start outsourcing on Upwork or whatever it was called back then, and then finally now, I'm like, I can't do it without someone that's supporting me, at least on the finer details. And I mean, now more than ever, it's patience, I think, is key, because my natural ability, like I remember back in school, I would be the one that didn't want to do team projects because I had to get it done, because I think I was burned at an early time when like these group projects, I'm thinking like elementary school. And then like, inherently, like it wasn't like I wanted to necessarily do them, but the people pleaser in me was like, it's got to get done. So I guess I'll just do it myself. So it's crazy, but like I've done a lot of work on myself, like going back and like it's that whole like it's got to get done, so Joe's just gonna do it, and that's what I've had to break. Like that mentality going into things. This like, wait, hold on, I can ask for help. I can get a team around me to shore up the things that maybe I'm not great at, or I'm like burning out on, staying up too late, grinding it out, where I should just like, hey, I'll pay someone this, but what's my hourly rate or whatever my worth is for this thing, and get super intentional on, maybe there's a different approach. That's always going through my mind now. Yeah.
Do you feel like that mindset was what led to burnout, as like you were going through the process and building the business?
100%. Yes. It was that, with partnerships or any team, there's a dynamic there too. So it's, for the longest time, I had my buddy and old business partner, Matt Wolf, and you followed along for a long time. I just hung out with him the other day. We're still great buds, and at the same time, it's kind of like a marriage. I mean, when you're in a business partnership, you gotta support each other.
As you've talked about, like, hey, I changed my mindset from just hustling, and you've built in these boundaries like in your schedule and your time. Like, how did you make that transformation? Because there's a lot of guys, it's like, can't imagine what they would do with their life outside of like being focused on work. How did you make that transition and switch your focus?
Yeah, it's a solid question. And it's not to say that, I have a ton of free time, because I enjoy the creativeness of business. And what I've found is even the word business, I try to reframe that in my mind. And not a lot of people see it this way, but it's busyness. If you look at the word, it's busyness. Do you really want to be busy? I literally remind myself all the time. And that's where I'm selective with calls, because that's the biggest thing that will take a lot of my time are calls and switching costs, switching from thing to thing. And that's why I deliberately put, after 3 p.m., no calls. So I get some quiet time, either to work deeper on something, or it is deliberate time with the family during a time I know, and again, I have 2 small kids, so it's like I know this is the time to leave a really good impression on them. So I spend that time. That's an investment that I know I can't get back later. So that's one of the reasons how I can keep my mind full, because like when I'm with them, I'm with them, because I know if I'm like trying to solve business problems, which can happen, in the moment when I'm hanging out with my kids, let's be honest, it's pretty hard to focus on business if I have a toddler or a pretty newborn in front of me. So it kind of supports me in that. But back to like, Fridays off. It's not like I'm off working, but I definitely have more time to think, to not switch costs. It's to focus a little deeper. I kind of do that on Mondays a little bit as well. But yeah, when it goes to like, I like to think and I like to kind of unload my mind, and I have tools to do that. So I'm not spinning around in my mind, with what about this? What about that? Or what do I got to do next tomorrow, or whatever it might be. So I try to unload my mind as much as possible. And I have some apps for that. I either write it down or use an app like the Oasis is a pretty cool app. It's like $5 a month, but I just literally ramble into my phone and it will capture my crazy thoughts, and I could put them into a to-do list, or maybe it's an email I want to write to someone, and at least it's out of my mind and I can move on with my time. So that's a big one, is quieting the chatter up top here, that's a good one. And then, we mentioned it prior to, but breath work. I love to do, it could be 5 minutes or it could be an hour long. Typically it's on the shorter end, but like when I'm done working or before work, or when I'm feeling stressed, when I actually realize it in the moment, I'll do like 5 to 10 minutes of like Wim Hof style, something that gets my mind to kind of refocus, and that's kind of like deep inhales, kind of like this whole, there's like 3 patterns. You can look it up on YouTube if you're not familiar, but the whole thing is just heightening the energy in your body. It usually clears out any kind of cobwebs might have in my mind, or stuckness. I don't know. It's hard to describe, but then when I do it, I'm like, man, I should do this more often. And then it's just like, I'm kind of like a fresh person, Yeah, those are a couple of the ways I handle that situation there.
That's cool. I like that you've built in the transition.
Yeah.
And you're also in the process giving yourself grace, man. You're not going, dude, I know this, and then berating yourself. It's like, I know to do this, okay, let me work on this. Let me look for the area of improvement.
Yep.
So, being mindful and self-aware, man, I love that you've made that transition and brought that about. I do want to jump back. You had talked about like how we can get patterning, or like, we're impressionable from our parents, right? As far as your hustle perspective had been, what do you see that were things that were impressed upon you as a kid, as a young adult, from both of your parents, that then you may have reassessed as you're a husband and going along becoming a father, that didn't serve you well at that time?
Yeah, there was So the hustle, in terms of the work ethic, I think is a great thing that was instilled. But at the same time, I think, I brought up the people pleasing, and I don't know where that came up, but I know even in like the earliest school, that was something, it's like, oh, the teachers all loved me. And it wasn't like I was the loudest or like answering all the questions, but I was just like, I think I just showed up. I was always nice, blah, blah, which is great qualities. But at the same time, that was probably instilled. I mean, my parents, they divorced when I was in middle school. So that was a time where, I was still trying to figure out who I am socially, where I fit in. And I think that probably triggered, and leading up to that, there was, parents loved each other, but at the same time, there was this there was sometimes anger. There was, like not totally connected. So I don't know if that rubbed off on me to be like, all right, I gotta prove myself somehow, or there's all these little things that I think about that, that shaped up to be like, okay, how the hell did I shape up this way? And like, I don't know. And who knows the answers, but the point is, like, I realized, they did the best they could. And like every parent, we're all in our own place doing our best. And I think we all hit that ceiling, and we're not aware of what it is. And the fact that, like, I try to recognize the patterns, I learned a lot from my dad, and I'm sure we'll talk about his untimely passing. And I learned a lot after that point on. Like, there's different points and phases where I'm like, ooh, wow, that's where that came from. Or, ooh, that's something to notice and maybe try to do a little differently, or teach my daughters in a way that might be slightly modified from what I was taught. Not saying anything was bad at all, but just almost like these adjustments where I'm like, okay, I could see how that could shape up into something that's a little something that I don't want popping up in their lives, So.
Yeah, I think that's the amazing power that we as parents have, right? Is to look at who we are, what we've experienced, and then how do we want that to bring that to bear on our children. And, because, that's part of the legacy we're going to leave, man. And
that's it.
You want to be as loving as you can with your children. None of us want to impart anything negative, but we're human. It's going to happen, but it's, how do I leave as much positive and healthy and loving as I can? And you making that change and being, intentional on your boundaries and your focus, dude, that's amazing. That's a large shift. Yeah, absolutely. That's a large shift in the right direction, man.
I think so too, man. Yeah. And I'm at home too. And just to round this out, it's so interesting. My wife was super intentional. Like, when she was young, she wrote out all of these things that she wanted in a partner. And I think she shared it with her mom, and her mom was like, that's never going to happen, because it was things like, and not like, her mom was very supportive, still is, but it was like, okay, I want a husband that's at home with me all the time. I don't want to have to work too much, and she's talking about herself, because I want to support the kids, but I want my husband there as well. And we're both going to make a bunch of money. We're going to have a great life. We're going to have a family that feels tight. We're hanging out all day long. And she's like, how is that even possible? And this is pre-internet days, pre all of this other stuff. But yeah, we look around. I'm like, no, I've been hanging out with them all morning. You're the first time, halfway through the day that I walked into my office to actually get on a call. Was I doing work before? Yeah, I did some stuff on my laptop hanging around, but I was hanging out with them, enjoying a thunderstorm and hailstorm in San Diego, and all enjoying recording videos, being silly, throwing hail balls at each other. It's like we are living the life. And then all of us have the ability to do that. And it's just so interesting how she was so intentional with that. And I could see, it's where do you want to go, right? It's like, have the North Star. What do you want? And then kind of like, when you start to see it, you can believe it. And I hope this kind of gives that a little bit too. It's not like you need to model what I'm doing, but just believe that there's more in whatever ceiling that we all have.
Yeah, there is, I think, always more, right? You and I have both talked about this, there's always more, yeah. But how do we determine what it is we want? Because so many of us, and I'm guilty of this as well, I got focused on what don't I want, and I wasn't clear on what I do want. Where when I look at you, like, you've talked about, hey, we're going to Hawaii. I'm putting the phone away because I don't want to be connected, and I do want to be, present with my family and create these memories. I mean, how long did it take you to go from like that grind to where you are? Just, recently you got back from Hawaii, right, with the family.
Yeah.
How long did it take to make that transition in your life? Because I mean, it's not overnight that you got this to come about.
It helped with being intentional with my timing, and this is still a work in progress. And I got to give my wife a ton of credit, because when it comes to me being a quick start, one that wants to, I want to talk with more people. I'm very social, and I see there's a lot of ways to solve a problem, and like, oh, I'm curious enough where I'm like, I bet I can help that. I can fix that. I can, do that. Whereas she's my stabilizer. Like, she's the one that's like, okay, well, let's get intentional throughout the week and try to reduce switching costs. So maybe like, put certain, like podcasting, for instance. I podcast on just Thursdays every other week. But then every other week from that point on is a Thursday where I guest on other shows. Or maybe I'll have some other calls, but I try to kind of silo things in their own little groupings there. So I'm not thinking about podcasting all week long. I mean, that's probably the best way, is like I can silo it out and I can get ahead of things, and allow space. So when I know I'm going to Hawaii, or in next month, going to Mexico for a week, I'll still have work there, but at the same time, I'm going to make sure that calendar's blocked off. No one's getting on my calendar without me knowing otherwise. And yeah, in my mind, I just know I can put down the cell phone that I'm always connected with. My notifications aren't going to blow up everywhere on my, my Apple Watch or all these things. I'm going to be able to walk away, silent those. My team helps as well, so I'm not going to lie. It's not all just me, but I think being very intentional is something I didn't do before. Having partnerships, I mean, help, but sometimes don't help, because sometimes you feel like, okay, well, I'm leaving on a vacation, but I feel a little guilt that they're back working and like handling stuff. So that came up back in the day when working with Matt or even other people. So, and again, that's a conversation. That's just expectations as well, and pre-planning. So all that stuff helped me, and again, I'm not typically a super long pre-planner. My wife is. So got to give her a lot of credit to support me. She's like my COO, I would say. And she's a partner in my company. So she's a very silent partner, which is how she likes it.
She's like, you go be the face. I will
Pretty
keep
much.
Things organized.
Yes. Yep.
But that's
and
helpful,
my whole team too. Yeah. Yeah. It's not just her. It's
That's helpful, is like knowing your strengths, right? You get to work to your strength, and she supports you through her strengths. And it's like you guys are both supporting each other and raising your family. So it's like the cohesiveness in both areas, both personal and professional, and then feeding each other. Yeah. Well, you had alluded to this earlier. Back in 2019, your father did have an untimely passing. And it was like 2 weeks before your first daughter, who's now 4 years old, before she was born. Can you kind of shed some light on what happened, and then, like the insights that you gained from that? Because those insights then fed into how you were living your life, or the changes you made in living your life.
Yeah, Mike, you brought up a point in my life that was very unexpected, but at the same time, it, with my 2 weeks from the time my daughter was born, so my first daughter, leading up to that point, it was nearly a decade of trying to have her in the first place. We had a whole infertility struggles, IVF, paid a bunch of money, stress, the whole nine. Not fun, but we were having a great time, almost the time that we were going to meet her. And it was about 2 weeks, like 2.5 weeks, got this knock at the front door at 6 a.m. I'm like, that's not normal. And I peeked out there, and it was a gentleman, just business attire. I'm like, this is kind of strange. And ended up I was like thinking, like, who the hell can this be? And then finally I opened it up after a second knock. I'm like, okay, that one a little bit more forceful. I'm like, well, shoot. Opened the door, ended up being a deputy. So sheriff here in San Diego, coming with some news. And the news was that my father passed away the evening before. And he sat me down, sat my wife down, a pregnant wife, and woke her up, and essentially was told, your dad committed suicide last night at 6 p.m. And not a lot of details, but just I was the very first one to know. Luckily, they were able to send that news somehow. But yeah, that rocked me because that was completely unexpected. No indication prior to, but as you said, there were patterns, right? Like I started understanding, not immediately, of course, I was in shock, but also in wondering like how, why, it's all those things, and losing a parent in general, like that was the biggest fear of my life, is losing my dad or my mom, and my mom, both of them. And this one happened out of the blue and way too early. So yeah, that was 2 weeks, and there was this, that immediately took my head out of the game. And these are one of the points where I'm happy I had a business partner, Matt and I think we were supposed to record a bunch of podcasts that day too. So he's like, dude, I got it. I got you. Be with your family, do what you got to do. So I appreciate him tremendously for handling that. And on that side, because I literally, my brain was not in it for probably a good another 2 weeks, and then and then I had the birth of my daughter, which was so wild. I mean, it's surreal, where there's like the lowest low and then the highest high, and I don't even know what to call it, but I had tears in my eyes when I saw her for the first time. And I don't cry much, but just like, bam, turned on, and did that with my second daughter as well. Like, this is so crazy how that happens. I remember in the moment, I was just like, wow, bodies are weird. But, it's just like stone cold, not saying I'm stone cold, but, just like emotions. And yeah, so just that feeling of that big low, big up. And I don't know, man, I'll say, Mike, like the last, like that, I would say it's a good 2 years of time where it was me going like, holy moly, something like my life just got turned around in so many ways. And it had me analyzing what I learned about my dad and how I see a lot of the patterns that he had. And I also have them embodied in me. They were conditioned in early life. And now, I was seeing some markers of like, okay, like looking back, and this was a little bit of time after he passed, is like, I could see some of the patterns. He, used to be a really avid runner and get out and move his body, get outside. And he stopped doing that. He used to play music, guitar, and sing and hang out with friends and perform and stuff like that. He stopped doing that. He moved to a different location and was with a girlfriend. Don't think the girlfriend was that great. So that was a different change, and kind of took him away from him, I think, like, is really what ultimately happened. Communication wasn't happening as much. And as men, well, let's just be honest, suicide in general right now, not just in men, but just in general, is up. When it comes to driven men, and this is where, like on my podcast with entrepreneurs, I think that's a serious issue. And COVID didn't help at all. And, he passed right before COVID, but shoot, I mean, it would have been probably even worse during COVID for him, to be very honest, and I feel for a lot of men and women, because it's not, and honestly, the younger generation too. There's a lot of people who got stressed out during that time, and not to jump or get out, I don't think it's off topic, but like with AI and all these changes in the world that are happening so fast, I mean, people's livelihoods are changing right now more than they probably realize, or like the jobs are changing, the ways that, economy, there's all these factors that are happening so quick that most of us can't keep up with. And I just think of like, how does someone deal with that if they don't have the support or they're not communicating, and I hope the trend doesn't increase, but honestly, it might, for a little bit. Unless, and that's where I urge anyone listening here is like, know that you are not alone, and know that there's always people to talk with. And I'll just give the shout out right now here, Mike. It's like, if you want to reach out to me, obviously you could follow the podcast and feel like you have a community. You have this with Mike too, but hit me up.
Yes.
Like, my email is joe@hustleandflowchart.com. Like, that goes straight to me. My team might help kind of let you know if I'm busy or not, but like, I'll see it. It'll be starred if it's coming from someone who's listened, because like, if you relate to any of this, just know that you're not the same, not alone. So yeah, I don't know. The 2 years, there were a lot of shifts after I lost my dad, gained a child, ended up actually ending a long-term business relationship with Matt. And so it had me like, there were a lot of these things that I was like, whew. And, I noticed my anger popped up in some of this, my anxiety level, there were like feelings of panic attack in my chest, like after certain days of work, because I felt like I wasn't going down the right path. And these were all signs. I'm like, no, that's not me. Like, that's not normal Joe right there. Something needs to change. And the change ain't go kill myself, because that's how some people go, or run away from my family, or not talk, or, all these things. They're all patterns. They're all things. Like, the key is to lean into more of who you are. Like, slow down. What's that thing that makes you happy? Is it go outside, take a walk? Is it play guitar? Is it sing? Whatever, like, go run. Find those things. I think those habits that make you are like more life-changing than you ever believe. And they could be the most simple things. Get enough sleep too. That probably is a good starter, because most of us don't get that either.
Man, I think that is such a prime example, Joe, because we can postpone our personal growth, right? Or making changes, improving our self-awareness, any number of things that it's like, hey, one day when things calm down, hint, they don't.
Yeah, one day. What's one day?
Yeah, when is one day? It doesn't occur, because it's like, I look at what's gone on for you for the last 5 years. And it's like, for me on the last 5 years, it's been like, I've had 2 grandchildren born. I've had my father-in-law pass away. My dad passed away. We've now got my mother-in-law that's, in assisted living, and we're primary kind of involvement, with her, making sure she's okay and everything like that. I mean, she's in assisted living, but that's not hands off, and it's like, if either you or I were to postpone, hey, I'll work on myself when things calm down, it doesn't come. So you've created like, hey, I'm involved with a men's group, specific group of men. You check in regularly, accountability. And this kind of creates that insulation, like where you talked about the life changes your dad went through that weren't who he was. You've kind of created almost like a monitoring system, like an alert system. Yeah. I mean, is that kind of what you would see as well, or is it different for you?
Yeah. No, that's a good way to put it. It's an alert system, because there's a men's group, a smaller group of men, just about 5 of us, but there is a larger group, there's kind of a larger community as well but the small group, we check in very often. It used to be every single day. Now it's more on the weekly basis, because we're rearranging some of the things, but we check in on our patterns, how we're doing, habits. This is a group where we actually track pretty dang closely our daily habits. Like, there's checklists, there's typically like 10 things we want to stay true to, and they're all personal things. And like I mentioned, sleep, working out, getting enough water, even hydration. It's like a lot of simple stuff, but again, it's like you tick the boxes, you're starting to compound in the right direction, of what you actually want. And so the men's group's been great, man. I have them on my podcast sometimes, and we talk about it. And the ultimate thing is being more conscious and aware of what we're doing. because it's the choices we're making now, like I was kind of mentioning, they steer the direction that we want to go. So as long as you have generally a North Star or a vision of what you want to accomplish, if you surround yourself with people that can actually like understand and not only keep a lookout for if you're going off course, but at least they can support you, give you feedback if maybe you're saying something that's not aligned with what you say you want. And I think that's the biggest thing is like, you got to know what you want, or else like, what are you doing all this for? You might as well, I don't know, like wrap it up and go do something else, unless you really figure out what you got going on, because you got to be the leader of your life, but know that there's a team to support. That's what the men's group's great for. And I think that's what you do so well too, is you're supporting, men in this kind of way. And, there's groups, could be one-on-one, there's a lot of formats, but the key is to communicate and to have people you trust around you to support your vision.
Yeah. Not lone wolfing it in isolation, because that's like, if we look at the suicide, statistics that you talked about earlier, and that's a big thing, withdraw. And then it's like, there's nobody around and you just feel like detached, unwanted. Your worth goes, out the window, and dude, what you're doing keeps you in that spot. So as you've gotten to this place, what is it that you're doing to get yourself to the next place? Like, you've mentioned 10 things like that you're doing with the men, but I'm assuming you've got things that you're like, hey, these are my goals. And then you're taking daily actions, maybe habits to get to that point. Like, what have you begun incorporating to get there?
Yeah, for me, it's getting clear on, it's kind of shaving off a lot of the things that just aren't serving. It's kind of a iterative process. I'm always going through. It's an endless journey to know oneself. It's like, I have all the philosophers like, have said this kind of stuff, and it's like, man, I love it, because I'm like, oh man, I didn't think about that. And maybe it's a way to ask myself a question, or like what I said earlier. It's like, when I say yes to something, what is it that I'm giving up? Like, what's the trade-off here? And there's a lot of that, I would say. And because I'm at a point where I'm surrounding myself with a lot of old friends, which is kind of cool. But with that, like, these are friends I've worked parallel with, but now I'm starting to come together with certain friends who have, some have great networks, some have great ideas, and we're all kind of like collaborating and co-creating. And I think that's what's the coolest piece, is I'm doing that in personal life too. Like, there's other friends, and like one of them, I sometimes forget this, but I'm the VP of his company. This is an old friend of mine from band days. I have a guitar over here, and he runs a very successful company in Riverside County in San Diego, basically supporting kids with autism, people on the spectrum, in home, and giving them care. And he has hundreds of people, doing this every single day. I'm technically his VP. I don't think I've ever actually said that publicly, but it's more of like advising, hanging out, but we're discussing problems and way to arrange what we're doing. But at the same time, I find it is fun because I'm hanging out with one of my best friends, and we have a lot in common. I'm co-creating. Like, ultimately, that's what it is. We're bouncing ideas off of. He doesn't want to live in a bubble. That was why he chose me. Similar, it's like we get to talk about the deep and dark things that are stressing him out as well. So what's really cool is, when I'm working with, it's like I co-create more. In this example, I'm telling about my buddy who has this company that I'm a VP with. It's like, well, we're actually traveling to Mexico together as well. Like I mentioned Mexico earlier. It's like, well, going with him and his wife and his kid and my family as well. And, it's technically, it's for the business, but it's also, it's also for ourselves. And, these little bits of co-creating in terms of my life, that's honestly what I would love to do in general. It's co-create with people that I enjoy, who have expansive visions, people who are doing great things for people. Like in his case, helping a whole bunch of people that are underserved and don't have funding and all that, people on the spectrum. But at the same time, it's like, and then what I'm doing with businesses or on the podcast, in my show, and similar to what you're doing, I see that there's an impact. So that's what lights me up is co-creation, impact, and family, honestly. And it's making sure everything's grounded and going the right direction, that we're always busting through those ceilings that we may or may not be aware of. But yeah, it's just always upward, and I don't know, my brain, it's infinitely curious, so it's never going to stop. So I'm going to stop
I don't
yapping.
think it should. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Should it really stop though? Because that curiosity feeds everything. I mean, that's part of that joy, right? It feeds into all areas of your life.
That's right.
Well,
man.
dude, Joe, thank you so much for joining me today to share about the fact of, hey, our self-awareness and watching what we're doing and surrounding ourselves with relationships and being intentional, to where we're spending our time and having boundaries to protect, both our professional and our personal lives. Dude, I really appreciate all you've shared and brought to the table, because it's something that, we as men need to look at and be aware of and practice. But dude, I think most importantly on that is the grace that you've shown to yourself, Joe. You're not being hypercritical or demeaning, belittling of yourself. You're continuing to grow and giving yourself that room. So I really appreciate it, brother.
Thanks for seeing me that way, man. Yeah,
absolutely. Because that's the way you're presenting yourself,
That's how I want to be seen too. So it's nice to hear the validation, so.
Absolutely, man. My pleasure. Well, outside of this podcast, how can men get in touch with you, Joe?
Yeah, thank you for that setup, and genuinely, I mentioned earlier with the email, reach out to me personally, joe@hustleandflowchart.com. If you want to bounce any ideas or just say something, get something off your chest, like that's how you get directly hold of me there. Go listen to the podcast. We mentioned Hustle and Flowchart. You can find it at hustleandflowchart.com or on YouTube. You can look up my name, Joe Fier, Fier. That's how you can see more of these topics wrapped in kind of a business sense. But I'd say it's great for any driven person, because the whole thing is, I'm always, do the best you can and excel, kind of like what we've been talking, but find your enough. Like find, call it a balance, more like a harmony in what you're doing. And that's what I like to talk about there on the show. So those are the two ways. Thank you,
Fantastic. Mike. Absolutely, man. I appreciate it. So thank you so much, Joe.
Yeah. And hey, can't wait to hear from y'all. So reach out. I'll be waiting.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, my friend, for joining me on another episode. If you found the information within the show helpful, please leave a review on the platform you're listening to. It helps raise the show's visibility so other men can join us in breaking free. See you on the next episode, and remember to continue putting yourself out there. Have a great one.